3 years, 1,095 days, no call on my birthday, nothing when I had my knee replaced and spent 3 nights in a hospital room with nobody in the chair beside me, not even a text when my brother called to say he'd been diagnosed. 3 years of silence from my own son, and I had made my peace with it, or told myself I had, the way a man who sleeps on his right side to avoid the ache on his left tells himself he isn't in pain. Then my phone buzzed on a Tuesday afternoon in October while I was sitting on the tailgate of my new truck in the driveway, drinking coffee and watching the leaves come down off the oak tree out front. I almost didn't look at it. When I did, the number was blocked. I answered anyway, the way you answer a blocked number when you've spent 3 years half expecting a call you can't quite bring yourself to stop waiting for. Dad, just that one word, but it was enough. My chest did something I wasn't prepared for. Not quite pain, not quite relief. Something in between, something I don't have a word for. The voice of a man I hadn't heard since he stood in my living room in Farragut and told me I was selfish for not believing in him. I said his name, and then neither of us said anything for a moment that lasted about a decade. I saw you got a new truck, he said finally. I looked at the F-250 sitting in the driveway, black, fully loaded, a gift to myself after 31 years of running electrical crews in the Tennessee heat, after finally selling my contracting business for more than I thought it was worth. I'd posted one picture of it on Facebook, mostly for the guys I used to work with. Yeah, I said, I did. Listen, he cleared his throat. We're getting married in April. We want to do it right. Her family's got a lot of people on their side. The venue holds 300. I waited. We need some help with the costs. There it was. How much? I said. 80,000. A pause for your contribution. I sat on that tailgate and looked at that oak tree for a long time. The leaves were still falling, just one after another, quiet and slow, no hurry, no argument. She wants me to wire it by the end of the month, he said. Or, she's not going to include you on the guest list. She says if you can't support us financially, you're not really supporting us at all. She is fiancée, the woman I had never met, the woman who had been in his life for 2 years, the last year and a half of which I had not existed. Welcome to Dad's Real Revenge. Make yourself comfortable. This story's going somewhere you might not expect. Hit that like button and drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from, because I promise you're going to want to stay until the end. I didn't answer him right away. I told him I'd think about it and call him back. He said okay, and the call ended in about the same amount of nothing it had started with. I stayed on that tailgate until the coffee went cold. You have to understand something about who I am before this story makes any sense. I spent 31 years pulling wire in new construction and retrofits all over Knox County. I started as a helper at 22, pulling cable through wall cavities in 100-degree attics, and I ended up with a licensed crew of 14 and a reputation for being the contractor who showed up on time and didn't cut corners. Not once in 3 decades did I ever put a job together by hoping nobody would check my work. You build things to code or you don't build them at all. That's not a philosophy, that's just how you don't burn somebody's house down. Which is why I didn't call my son back that night and say yes. What I did instead was sit down at my kitchen table with a cup of actual hot coffee and open my laptop. I started where anybody starts. I typed her full name into Google. The first page was her Instagram, her LinkedIn. She listed herself as a personal financial advisor and lifestyle coach, and a few tagged photos from what looked like charity events in Atlanta. She was well dressed in all of them. Big smile, the kind that photographs well. I kept going. Page 2 of Google results is where things get interesting. Most people never look at page 2. I had a feeling about this one. A court filing from Fulton County, Georgia. A civil judgment entered 14 months ago. The plaintiff was a 73-year-old man. The judgment was for $62,000, the amount she had allegedly taken from his retirement account while managing his finances as a private advisor. The case had been settled, which meant nobody went to prison, and the record was there but quiet, the kind of thing that doesn't come up in small talk. I read it twice, then I read it a third time, the way I read a wiring diagram on a job that doesn't add up. Because in my experience, when something doesn't add up in the diagram, the problem is always bigger than the diagram shows. I went looking for the bigger problem. By Wednesday night, I had found 3 more civil complaints filed against her in 2 different states, Georgia and North Carolina, all involving money that had gone somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. One of them was from a widow in her 80s. The cases were at different stages. 1 had been dismissed. 2 were still active. I also found something else, a name she used to go by. A slightly different spelling of her middle name combined with a previous married name. She had been married before. That marriage had ended in a divorce finalized in Charlotte 18 months ago. The decree was in the online court database. I pulled it up and read through the financial disclosures. Her ex-husband had described in his filing a pattern of financial deception going back to the first year of their marriage. Accounts opened in his name without his knowledge. Credit cards maxed and repaid from joint funds. He'd hired a forensic accountant. The numbers weren't good. I sat back in my chair. My son was 31 years old. He was a kind person who had always trusted people more than he should have, a thing I used to see as a virtue when he was small. He was a project manager for a construction firm down in Atlanta. He made decent money. He had a 401k and a savings account and probably not much else by way of financial sophistication. And he was about to marry a woman who had made a career, I was becoming increasingly certain, out of attaching herself to men with access to money and walking away before the structure collapsed. My $80,000 wasn't going to fund a wedding. I printed everything, the civil judgments, the divorce filing, the court records. I put them in a manila folder, the same kind I used to keep project estimates and permit copies in back when the project was running. I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. I didn't call the police that night. I didn't call my son and yell at him over the phone. I told myself what I had told myself every time a job went sideways: slow down, get the full picture, then decide. Thursday I found the warrant. It wasn't from Georgia or North Carolina. It was from Tennessee, Shelby County, out of Memphis. An active warrant for theft by deception, filed 8 months ago by the family of a 78-year-old man who had passed away and left behind bank records showing that his financial helper had redirected nearly $40,000 over the course of a year into an account that wasn't his. The warrant had been issued. She had not been located. She was currently living in Atlanta. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called my son. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. "I'll come down to Atlanta," I said. "Let me take you both to dinner. Before I make any decision about anything, I want to meet her in person." He hesitated. I could hear her in the background, a murmur, not words. Then he came back. "She wants to make sure you're bringing the decision," he said, "not just coming to talk." "I'm bringing a folder," I said. "That's what I'm bringing." Another pause, another murmur in the background. "Fine," he said. "Saturday. There's a steakhouse she likes on Peachtree." I wrote down the name. I said I'd be there. I made the drive down I-75 on Saturday afternoon. 4 hours with the radio mostly off and a lot of quiet that I needed. I was not going to a restaurant to win an argument. I was going because my son was 31 years old, and the woman he was planning to marry had an active arrest warrant in the state of Tennessee, and I was his father. And that meant something even after 3 years of silence, even after a phone call that opened with the price of my company at dinner. The steakhouse was nice. Leather booths, a wine list that required a reading light, waitstaff who knew how to disappear between courses. I got there first and took a corner table where I could see the door. I ordered water. I waited. They came in together. My son looked older. Not bad older, just older. He was carrying some weight in his face that hadn't been there before. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out whether I was a problem or a solution, and I understood that because I had spent the last 4 days looking at his fiancée the same way. She was put together. That was the word for it. Perfectly put together. The kind of woman who looks like she's always just arrived from somewhere important. She extended her hand across the table and smiled with every part of her face except, if you look carefully, her eyes. I shook her hand. We sat down. The first 15 minutes were what you'd expect. Pleasantries that weren't really pleasant. My son doing most of the talking, filling the silence. She asked about my contracting business in the way you ask about something you've already looked up. Specific questions delivered casually, like she was checking if my answers matched her research. She asked what I'd sold it for. She asked it like a question about the weather. I didn't answer that one. I just smiled. Then she set a folded piece of paper on the table. "We didn't want there to be any ambiguity," she said. Her voice was smooth and reasonable. The voice of someone who had practiced being reasonable. "This just outlines the contribution amount, the transfer instructions, and what it gets you." What it gets you. Like access to my own son's wedding was a purchase. Like the 14 years of child support, the $22,000 for his last 2 years of college, the first car, the security deposit on his first apartment. Like all of that had already been receipted and filed, and I was starting from zero. My son was not looking at me. He was looking at his water glass. I put both hands flat on the table. The manila folder was on the booth seat beside me, out of sight. "I need to say something to you both," I said. I kept my voice at the same level I use when I'm telling a crew foreman that something has to be redone and I need him to hear it without getting defensive. Calm, direct, no edge. I didn't drive 4 hours to sign anything tonight. I drove down here because 3 years went by and my son is getting married, and I want a chance to know who he's marrying before I make any decisions. She started to speak. I kept going. I did some reading this week, I said. The kind of reading I probably should have been invited to skip, if things were straightforward. My son looked up. I reached down and brought the folder up onto the table. I didn't open it. I just set it there, between the bread basket and the water glasses. There's a civil judgment in Fulton County from 14 months ago, I said, looking at her now, not my son. A 73-year-old man, $62,000. I watched her face. Nothing moved. That was its own kind of information. There are 2 more active civil complaints in Georgia and North Carolina. There's a divorce record from Charlotte with a forensic accounting report attached. I paused, and there's an active arrest warrant out of Shelby County, Tennessee. Theft by deception. Filed 8 months ago. The silence at the table was total. My son had gone completely still. She was the first one to speak. Her voice didn't crack. I'll give her that. Those are all misunderstandings, she said. Legal matters that are in the process of being resolved. Your son knows about all of this. I looked at my son. He did not look like someone who knew about all of this. Everything in that folder is public record, I said. Court documents, filed cases, an active warrant. If you're in Atlanta right now with a Shelby County warrant outstanding, any officer who runs your name can take you in. I let that sit. I am not signing anything. I am not wiring anything. And I'd like 5 minutes alone with my son. She stood up. She had the composure of someone who had been in bad rooms before and knew how to exit them. I'll give you 2 a moment, she said, and she walked toward the back of the restaurant. I knew she wasn't coming back to the table. My son sat across from me and stared at the folder. I didn't know about the warrant, he said quietly. I know. She told me the other stuff was a vindictive ex. Her ex filed a forensic accounting report, I said. That's not vindictive, that's expensive. He put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands against his face. He sat like that for a moment. Then he put them down. Why didn't you just tell me on the phone? Would you have listened? He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Everything's in there, I said. Every document has a case number. You can verify every single one yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. I pushed the folder across the table to him. He took it. He held it with both hands the way you hold something you're not sure you want to open. I'm not angry at you, I said. I want you to know that. I didn't drive 4 hours to be angry. I came because you are my son, and you are about to make a decision that will cost you more than any wedding, and I needed you to have the information. He nodded, very slowly. I put cash on the table, enough to cover whatever we might have ordered, and a little over. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I'll be at the Holiday Inn off the highway, I said. If you want to talk more tonight, call me. If you need time, take it. The folder's yours. I walked out. I didn't look toward the back of the restaurant. The drive to the hotel took about 12 minutes. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off for a while before going inside. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on road trips, too stubborn to admit he was tired, and how he'd wake up disoriented in the dark and not know where he was. I always told him the same thing. Right here, I've got you. I thought about how 3 years of silence doesn't erase that, no matter how much easier it would be if it did. I went inside. I didn't sleep much. I was back home in Farragut by Sunday afternoon. Monday went by. Tuesday, I did what I've always done when there's nothing left to do. I worked, cleaned the gutters, stacked the firewood I'd been putting off since September, made a point of not checking my phone every 15 minutes, and mostly succeeded. Tuesday evening, I turned on the local news while I was heating up leftovers. I almost missed it. The anchor moved from a road construction update on I-40 to something else, and I caught the words Atlanta woman and warrant, and I set the bowl down. She had been stopped at a routine traffic checkpoint Monday evening in Cobb County. The officer ran her license. The Shelby County warrant came back immediately. She was taken into custody at the scene. The local news had picked it up because there were apparently additional federal inquiries being opened. The pattern of civil complaints across multiple states had attracted the attention of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and a parallel investigation had been quietly ongoing for 4 months. The reporter mentioned that she had been engaged to a local resident who was cooperating fully with authorities. I turned off the television and stood in my kitchen for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what that felt like. I know how this reads on paper. Bad person gets caught, justice gets served, man drives home with his principles intact. But it doesn't feel like a win when the bad person is someone your son loved, and your son is 31 years old, and just had his whole world come apart at a traffic stop on a Monday night. There was no satisfaction in it. There was just the weight of it, which was heavy in a different way than I'd expected. I made a pot of coffee I didn't particularly want and sat with it in the dark. He called me at a little after 10. He didn't say hello, he just said Dad. Same word as the first call, but this time it sounded like a person who had just hit solid ground after a very long fall. I know, I said. I saw the news. I pulled up the court records Monday morning, he said. His voice was flat, not cold, just emptied out. After you left Saturday, I read every document in that folder. I verified every case number. A pause. I called the Shelby County Clerk's office myself. Okay, I said. I don't understand how I didn't see it. She was very good at her job, I said. The job wasn't being your fiancé. The job was finding someone who had access to money and extended trust. You had both. I let a moment go by. That's not a failure of yours. It's a failure of hers. He didn't say anything for a while. 3 years ago, he said, I stood in your living room and called you selfish because you wouldn't put money into a business I wanted to start with a guy I'd known for 6 months. I remember. You were right. I sat with that for a moment. I had spent 3 years expecting that I would want to hear those words badly enough to feel something when they finally came. Instead, they just arrived. Quiet, like a door that had been stuck for a long time finally swinging open in a draft. I was right about the business, I said. I wasn't always right about how I handled things. I was harder on you than I needed to be more than once. That's mine to own too. The line was quiet. What do I do now, he said. Same thing you do after any job falls apart, I said. You assess the damage, find out what's salvageable, start again. And us? I thought about the folder sitting on that table. I thought about his hands holding it, careful, like he already half knew what was inside. I thought about the parking lot at the Holiday Inn with the engine off. I'll tell you what I can offer, I said. I'll pay for a good therapist, someone who specializes in this kind of thing, because what she did to you was calculated manipulation, and it doesn't just wash off. I'll make sure you have food on the table while you get your footing, because you're my son, and that doesn't stop being true because we went 3 years without talking. But I'm not going to pretend those 3 years didn't happen. I'm not going to pretend a phone call undoes what was said in my living room. He was quiet. I know, he said finally. I'm not asking for that. I know you're not, I said. That's why I'm telling you the door is open. He came up to Farragut the following Saturday morning. He pulled into the driveway and stood beside the F-250 for a moment before he came inside. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd opened my laptop 10 days earlier and gone looking for the truth. And I made eggs and toast, and we didn't talk about any of it for a while. We just ate. At some point, he looked out the window at the truck and said, "That's a nice truck." "Yes, it is," I said. And that was enough for a start. I'm not going to tell you things are back to normal, because they aren't. There are years of quiet between us that aren't going to fill in overnight, and I have enough sense left to know that. What I can tell you is that I showed up. When it was easier not to, when everything he'd said to me 3 years ago was still in the room, when the only reason he'd found the number was because he'd seen a truck on Facebook and thought there was money attached to it, I still showed up. Not with a check. With the truth. That's what the job actually is. Not writing the check. Not absorbing whatever comes your way to keep the peace for another season. The job is showing up with the truth and trusting your kid to decide what to do with it. Some of you watching this know exactly what it costs to drive 4 hours for someone who told you not to bother. You know what it feels like to stand at a door that might not open and knock anyway. Keep knocking. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. I'll see you next time.